Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Hello, everyone. I'm Susan Coffin in for Attitude Magazine, and you're listening to Attitude's ADHD Experts. As parents of children and young adults with attention deficit disorder and learning disabilities, we're just all too aware of the obstacles they face in the academic world. Difficulties focusing, difficulties starting work, difficulties finishing homework assignments, all too common. Our guest today, Dolin, will offer parents specific tactics that they can use to guide their children to complete homework efficiently, limit procrastination, and plan ahead for long-term assignments. Let me mention our sponsor today, CogMed, the Working Memory Training Program. As many of you know, working memory impairments are very common in people with attention deficit and learning disabilities. CogMed offers working memory training to improve attention, to improve behavior, and the capacity to learn. And more than 8 out of 10 CogMed users improve their working memory on average by as much as 30%. So for more information, visit CogMed online, www.cogmed.com. And with that, let me introduce Dolin. I'm very pleased to welcome her back today. She is the president and the director of Educational Connections, a tutoring firm based in Virginia. Anne holds a BA in child psychology and a master's degree in special ed with a concentration in learning disabilities. She is a recognized expert in education and learning disabilities with over 20 years of tutoring experience. She's worked with, believe it or not, over 8,000 students. She sits on the board of CHAD, Children and Adults with Attention Deficit Disorder, and the International Dyslexia Association, and has delivered hundreds of presentations focusing on academic achievement and parenting issues. Anne is also the author of the award-winning book, Homework Made Simple, Tips, Tools, and Solutions for Stress-Free Homework. Anne, thank you so much for joining us again today.
Well, thank you so much, Susan. It's great to talk to everybody today. I'm excited to talk about my favorite topic, which is homework. So we'll discuss that as well as overcoming academic obstacles because they're all so entwined. But let's start out with really talking about what's going on with our kids. You know, I hear from parents so often when they call our office for executive functioning coaching or tutoring that their child is really smart. But because of ADHD, there's a disconnect between what they are able to do and then what they actually do. So there's a disconnect between their ability and what they produce in class, their performance. And so often that manifests itself in different ways. And on the next slide, you'll see, a lot of the academic obstacles that our students with ADHD face. Organization, maintaining focus, whether you have a daydreamer or a fidgety student. Obviously, procrastination, we talked about that earlier. Knowing which study skills to employ, keeping themselves alert even when technology is humming in the background. And then, finally, some of our kids do deal with perfectionism. So let's get started and talk about organization, because that seems to be a common thread among many students with ADHD. And it's tough for our students, mainly because of paper flow. I found that with many schools going to online platforms, online textbooks, all of their work is electronic, many of the organization issues I've seen in students have gotten better. But the plain fact is there's still paper, and our kids still have to manage the paper flow. So when it comes to binders, I've often found that for younger kids in elementary school, a product like a Case-It binder with a built-in accordion folder really helps kids, because often our students are the ones that aren't too good at hole punching and filing, but they can really put things in the right section of that index tabs in the back of their binder. Also, when you have an older student that has block scheduling, these are kids that often do best with 2 separate backpacks. I worked with a student who went to a high school and they had black days and red days, and it was hard for him to remember what to bring on each day. But for him, he finally bought a black backpack and a red black backpack and sorted his binders accordingly. So that often helps older students. But at the end of the day, kids really have to be able to take out those old papers and put them somewhere. A general rule of thumb is that kids should archive, they should keep papers that are important, like old tests and quizzes, because teachers often use those to make new tests. So those can go in, you see the picture here, the Pendaflex desk-free hanging organizer, which you can buy on Amazon. And this is one of my favorite products. I have them for my kids, but I actually use mine all the time. And sometimes as a parent, I get so many papers from my kids' school, and I'm like, you know what should I save? Do I really want this art project? I'm not sure. So the ones that look pretty good, I will save. And at the end of the year, I'll sort through it and throw away the ones I don't want. But the key is to maintaining organization is to archive regularly, but to also schedule something called a clean sweep. And this is a 20-minute appointment with your child once a week where everybody in the house gets organized. And I often encourage parents to turn up their favorite song or their kids' favorite songs, hip-hop, whatever it might be, and everybody spends that 20 minutes getting organized. On the next slide, you'll see that photographs are often super helpful. With many students I've worked with over the years, especially in elementary school, that had a hard time keeping their desk organized, I took a picture of what clean looked like, because often they didn't know what it meant when they were told go clean out your locker, clean out your desk, or at home clean your room. So anytime you can use a picture as a visual reference, that's super helpful. And if you're doing a picture for, say, a clean room, you might also want to have a couple bullet points in writing of what clean really looks like. And that might be nothing on the floor, all cups in the kitchen, laundry in the laundry room. In addition, there are certainly other techniques that help kids get organized. And one of them, and this is my favorite one, is the launching pad. You may have heard of the launching pad before, but it's really just a bin, a box, and really anything, an old dishpan. And it goes by the door from which your child exits in the morning. So the night before, your student is responsible for packing up his binder, putting his binder in his backpack, and a launching pad. And in a launching pad can also go any musical instruments he needs to bring back the next day, a library book, and even shoes if he's running around at the last minute in the morning trying to find those shoes. So a launching pad helps the student launch into a new day in an organized fashion. Post-it notes are also great for reminders, but you may have found as a parent that after a couple of days, the kids don't even look at Post-it notes anymore because they kind of blend in with the paint. So a good idea is to change up those Post-it note reminders. This morning I put one on the door for my son because even though I put his pill out this morning, he has ADHD, he did not take it. So I put a reminder on the door that said pill and teeth. Take your pill, make sure you brush your teeth before you leave. It just has to be simple phrases. So let's move on to focusing and just finishing, because that seems like it's a big issue for many of the students that we work with. And what I will say is that kids do homework so much differently than I think we did as kids. Back in the day, I can remember sitting at my desk, and that was just the expectation. But these days, so many kids don't like to do homework the old-fashioned way for many reasons. So whether they have ADHD or not, many kids are better off standing. And this could be if you have an island at your kitchen or like a bar that has a higher countertop. Standing and working is really optimal for many students throughout the country are seeing the results of research showing that kids are more focused when they're standing and working. So stand-up desks allow kids to stand up when they want to and sit down if they want to. We also know that many kids need a fidget toy, and this is a picture of the Tangle Jr., and this is one of my favorite ones. This would be for the child who just seems to always be touching things. I don't know if you have a child like this, but the student who always seems to be biting his sleeve or flicking his mechanical pencil, rocking back and forth in his chair, your daughter who's always twirling her hair. It's almost like they need that sensory stimulation. And sensory stimulation actually helps kids to focus. Many times parents will say, oh, put that down, stop playing with that. But the reason kids gravitate towards touching things is it helps calm them down. So the Tangle Junior is actually a research-based product that helps students to focus. And you can get that on Amazon too, or their website is Tangle Creations. Let's talk for a minute about procrastination, because this seems to be one that many parents talk about and that their kids struggle with. So on the next slide, before we get into those specifics about the tools, let's talk a little bit about when to be concerned about procrastination. I personally see procrastination in two camps, functional and dysfunctional. Functional is the one where your child has a math assignment due on Tuesday. It's Monday night at 10 o'clock, and they're just started, but they can get it done, and they turn it in, and everything is okay. Dysfunctional is when your student has a big research project due on Friday. They've had a month to do it. They start it on Wednesday night at 10 o'clock, and by the time Friday rolls around, they don't have it completely done, and what is done isn't done very well. Those kids fall into the category of dysfunctional procrastination. And so often the reason that they struggle with that is they don't realize when they're starting to procrastinate in the first place. Think of it this way, you need to get started on a research project, but also you want to look at all your Instagram posts. So you're thinking, oh, Instagram? Research project. Well, obviously I'm going to pick Instagram. But simply noticing when you're in that zone and that you're feeling that pull towards Instagram, knowing that point of behavior is super important. And really the best strategy is to have the lowest barrier of entry possible for kids. I've worked with a lot of kids, especially with writing, and they have such a hard time getting started in writing, so they'll really put it off. And often I'll say, you know what, just put a title page, just write your name, type the title, or even, write one sentence. Or what if you started your bibliography first instead of actually writing the paper and you just write down one source? So often just getting started is the best avenue for our students. They can do this a couple of ways. 5 minutes of fury. They set their timer for 5 minutes. They work as hard as they can for 5 minutes. Tolerable 10. Set it for 10 minutes. The idea is anybody can tolerate anything for 10 minutes. Let's talk a little bit about study skills on the next slide, because this seems to be tough for many of our students. They don't really know how to study. Sometimes they'll do a good job on the test and they'll think, oh, I just got lucky. Or they'll say the test was easy. But it's hard for them to kind of look back and determine what did they do differently that time, or if they didn't do such a great job, what could they do differently next time? There are 3 research-based study skills that have been shown through multiple research studies to be optimal when it comes to retention of information. The first one is distributed practice. And distributed practice is the idea that instead of let's say your student has a math test on Friday, instead of studying an hour on Thursday night, taking that 1 hour and parsing it out. So you might study for 20 minutes Tuesday, 20 minutes for Wednesday, 20 minutes Thursday. Just by parsing it out and sleeping on it, and the key to distributed practice is sleep, you're cementing that information into long-term memory. And that's why cramming doesn't work. Cramming will work to get a good grade immediately on a test or a quiz, but when you see that information later on, say a month later or for a cumulative final exam, it's not there. It's not there because you really don't have it cemented into your long-term memory. So distributed practice has been shown by research to be key. So is multimodal studying, and that means not just reviewing information visually. 84% of students report that they study by simply rereading their textbook or their notes. All they do is take out the materials and they read it. And reading is a very heavy visual load on the brain, and it's not ideal, not an ideal way of studying. A better way is to take that information and maybe write margin notes in your book or on Post-it notes or in your notes. Take all that information at the bottom of the page of your notes and in just a couple of lines, synthesize it into your own words. That way, the act of manipulating it and putting it into your own words is powerful, and you're doing that tactily. Also, if you can discuss it with somebody else, that's really powerful. These days, I've seen so many kids FaceTiming with their friends in their classes, and it's a fantastic way to study. Also Skype, but FaceTime on iPhone seems to be a lot more popular now. But again, that's multimodal, because instead of just doing it and reading it or seeing it, you're also hearing it. But let's talk a little bit about what happens when our kids do get distracted from the media. And on the next slide, you'll see that there's all kinds of media out there, and one week as parents we think we know what it is, and the next week it changes. But let's just talk about the basics. For one, music is generally okay for rote memorization. Your child has to retype an essay. Your student has to write spelling words 3 times each. With music in the background, those things are, doing those kind of rote tasks are just fine. But a lot of research shows that when there's novel music, and that means music maybe that your child isn't familiar with, perhaps music that they're kind of listening to the lyrics at the same time, that actually interferes with learning. So when studying for tests, music is not at all helpful. Many students also report that their biggest distraction is actually their phone. And texting is something that's affecting all kids. I really recommend to our students that if that's really bothering you and it's interfering with your productivity, it's really a good idea to physically put your phone in another room, or get up and put your phone on the other side of the room, so that if you want to check your text or your Twitter feed, you actually have to get up and move. Many students will report that that is such a great distractor that they just cannot have it with them. However, they are okay doing these things called tech breaks, and tech breaks seem to be very popular. There's some research that shows you work for 20 minutes, and then you get up and you check your phone for a minute or two, and then get back to work. That is perfectly fine. I want to share some apps with you on the next slide, a couple of my favorites. You may find that your child has a hard time writing his assignments down in that good old-fashioned assignment notebook. There are a couple apps out there that are really popular and that help kids skirt that issue. One is called My Homework, and that's for Android or iPhone. And the other one is iStudies Pro. And there's also a third one called iHomework, which is also for iPhone. And these are kind of like an assignment notebook, a planner, but for the phone. And kids report that it's so much easier for them because they can simply type in their assignments. They can take a picture of the assignment from the board once the teacher writes it up there. And they can also, with the click of a button, send themselves text reminders when things are due. My favorite app for studying is called Study Blue. You may have heard of Quizlet in the past, and Quizlet is a great way of studying information like words for Spanish or for French, for learning vocabulary words in science. But a new app called Study Blue actually makes this now multisensory. So you can put in your words and their definitions. It will create flashcards for you, but you can also upload your own audio notes that you speak into the app, and that way you can hear yourself reading part of your notes or important information. You can upload pictures from your book. It makes it, again, multisensory. And then the last one is one my 16-year-old shared with me because this was an issue for him too, and he said that this has become his all-time favorite. He has a Mac, so this is only for Apple-based products, but it's called Self-Control. And Self-Control is a software program that allows the student to basically blacklist the websites that are really distracting to him or her. Maybe he likes going on YouTube, or he likes internet shopping. Probably your daughter likes that. Maybe they're always on their Twitter feed or on Facebook. You can basically click on the apps that you do not want access to and the amount of time. So you may say blacklist these applications for 25 minutes. So no matter what you do, you can turn the computer off. You can take off the app. It doesn't matter. You still will not have access to those applications during that time. And then the flip side of all of these things, and actually is more common than we might think with ADHD, is the issue of perfectionism. And I often see this in kids that it looks like they don't care. It looks like that they're just plain old procrastinating. But really, at the end of the day, they're having a hard time getting started because they just want it to be perfect. So it's almost easier for them to save face and not do it at all and get a bad grade than to have tried and failed. I also see other students that want to do everything. So, for example, they may have a grade that's not the best and they want to, change things around. So they'll not only do the assignments, but in anything that the teacher mentions, they could do, like, oh, it would be great if you annotated this chapter, meaning they don't absolutely have to, but they could if they want to. Or, oh, by the way, did you see that article in the Washington Post on Syria this morning? You should read it. So often perfectionists will take all this information and they'll try to do everything. And instead, they really just need to do the must-do assignments. So one idea is to have your child categorize what type of work it is. Is it a must-do? Is it a should-do? Is it a could-do? And really only tackle those must-do assignments. Also, you see a picture of one of my favorite apps. It's so great for kids that worry a lot. We often see anxiety with ADHD. The student can type in their worry and touch a button, and this is an app on the phone, and it goes through the shredder, and it's in a million pieces. But at the end of the day, really, when we want our kids to do a good job on homework and be successful in the classroom, we have to understand that there will be frustration over homework. Often I hear things like, I hate math. This is stupid. Why do I have to even learn fractions anyways? Or my teacher's so mean. Why did I have to get Mrs. Smith? She's the worst teacher in all of 5th grade. Or why do I have to get Mr. Wilson? He gives more homework than anyone else. And it's so easy for us as parents to shoot right back at our kids and say, well, don't you want to get into college? That's why you need to know this. Or what do you mean Mr. Wilson gives a lot of homework? If you just focused, it wouldn't be that much after all. But it's important to step back and realize that our child may have the maturity of a student younger. And the first step in helping our kids is really to empathize with them. So, when I'm working with a student and they say something like, oh, my teacher is so mean, I'll often nod and say, oh, I see. And then I might name the feeling, or I state the feeling, like, you sound really frustrated, or you sound really angry. What happened with Mr. Wilson today? And let the student tell me what happened. Sometimes I'll also use the magic wand strategy, and this kind of takes the child out of the situation of, just feeling so negative about whatever is going on. And I might say something like, oh, you know what, don't you wish that teachers never assigned homework ever? Wouldn't that be great? If I had a magic wand, I would make it so you never had homework ever again. Or if I had a magic wand, I'd make it so you could pick your teacher every year. And just kind of putting your child into fantasy land, even if it's just for 20 seconds, and kind of put them in a better mood and keep them on the track when it comes to homework. So at the end of the day, really knowing your child and knowing when perhaps you might not be the right teacher is key. In my next slide, the push and pull of academics, I mentioned a famous quote by really the godfather of ADHD, Russell Barkley, he says, don't sacrifice your parent-child relationship on the altar of academic performance. And it's really true. If you feel like you're pushing so hard on your child and he's really pushing so hard back, then that's when you know something isn't quite right. And maybe having a neutral third party like a tutor or a coach work with your child is key. So I'd love to, and on my next slide, I just wanted to mention a few free resources that I have for you. I have a number of ebooks and also lots of blog articles. The ebooks have to do with easy ways to de-stress the homework process. This one is helping your disorganized students. And I write blogs weekly, usually a couple a week, on different issues facing our students with ADHD. So let's go to questions.
Thank you, Anne, so much. Everyone, Anne's website is great, so write that down, ectutoring.com, and check that out. Anne, we have a variety of questions in terms of age, elementary, high school, college, and even adult learners. And I thought maybe we'd take a quick poll and ask people to tick off which age range they're especially interested in, so we can try to tailor the time that we have to the area of most interest for people. So if you just check, please, elementary, high school, college, or adult learning, just one, just the one that you're most interested in. So, all right, that's interesting, 50% elementary, 43% high school, all right, college, because there are a lot of college questions. So we'll get to that. Okay. Then let's start with elementary school, and maybe you could just recap what I've frequently read, and tell me if you agree with this, that getting started in elementary school with the right study habits is really key to the future. Can you sort of sum up what you would advise parents to put in place in terms of homework structure in elementary school?
Sure. Susan, I'd say the most important thing that parents can do when they have a younger child is to set up a routine. There are 5 times that kids can do homework: right after school, after about a 30-minute break, before dinner, after dinner, or before bed. And you will find the older your child gets, the more they're going to push the envelope until later in the evening to get started. So in elementary school, it's really key to set a start time. That's almost more important than an end time. I like the idea of giving kids about a half-hour break with the expectation that they get started on homework after that half-hour break. It could vary. Maybe on Monday, for example, you're at home with your child, and your child gets off the bus, he gets a snack, plays outside for a few minutes, and after that 30 minutes starts his homework. But maybe on Tuesday, he goes to aftercare. He still comes home and gets that 30-minute break and then starts homework. So there's a routine every day. When kids have a routine, they're less likely to fight you on things, and they're more likely to stick with it and to follow direction. Also, Susan, it's important
okay, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to mention, figure out where your child should do homework.
Right, that was going to be my question.
Okay.
Yeah.
And, I used to be a believer that homework should be done in the same place every day, day in and day out, but the research actually shows that's not true. Really, kids should have at least 2, usually 3, maybe 4 places that they can do homework. It's okay for the location to vary every day. So maybe one day it's in your home office. The next day, my personal favorite, the dining room table. It just generally needs to be a place that's clutter-free and distraction-free as much as possible. It's never going to be perfect. I've seen people go out to IKEA and spend, $1,000 on setting up these elaborate homework zones. And that's fine, but it's not completely necessary. It's more important to sit down with your child and kind of be a detective. Figure out, okay, let's try this place for a couple days, see how that works. And then let's compare it against this place. Try it out for a couple days, see how it works. And that's really the best way, not to tell your child where to do homework, but kind of to be a detective and figure it out with your student.
Right. That sounds great. I mean, that is really new news, because we have frequently been told same place, set up a place, always be the same place. So that's an interesting idea. What about the role of TV gaming? Some people have said, they try to restrict that. for their middle schooler during the week. What's your advice on how to handle games and TV during the week when there's homework at play?
It really honestly depends on your child. I have 2 kids, and one of my kids can handle playing periodically, and he's not really addicted to it. But I have another child that if I gave him free reign, it wouldn't work out too well. And so he's older now, but when he was younger, I noticed that very different from my other child, he had to have very strict guidelines. But I also found that I was monitoring it all the time. It became like this part-time job, And so ultimately, we sat down and decided that for him, we had the same rule for my other son because he didn't really care whether they got video games or not, that there was no video games during the week. And that's just kind of what worked for us. Other parents will use video games as a reward during the week, and that's a great idea too. You just have to be aware that you need to tie it to something like work completion or positive attitude during homework time, which I personally like better than work completion, because if you tie it to work completion, then it's your job of being the homework police to figure out exactly every single assignment your child has, and that's sometimes hard to do.
Right. Just dialing back for 1 second to the question of location. There's one person here who says her child, and this is so familiar to me, so I identify with this question. Her daughter insists on doing homework on the bed and will not move off the bed. And another one who says their child insists on doing it in their room with music on. How do you handle this? How should parents handle this? And can kids really do homework well on their bed? This is a big issue in my family.
I guess it depends. If you have a child who's relatively successful and that's how they're doing homework and they're doing okay, I would leave it alone. I probably wouldn't pick that battle. If you have a child who's not at all doing well and when you pop in there, you see that YouTube is up on their screen or that they're, watching a movie or playing video games, then you know that the bedroom isn't a good place. But really opening the dialogue. It's hard as a parent to say, well, listen, Sarah, there's a new sheriff in town, and we're going to do things differently from now on. It's not going to really go that well if you've allowed your child to do homework on his bed, in his bedroom, for many years. You need to sit down with your child and say, look, it seems like this is difficult. It seems like this may not be working. What do you think? And just have a heart-to-heart discussion with them and see if you can kind of reach a happy medium. Perhaps homework it could be started in the bedroom, but after dinner it has to be done downstairs. Something like that might work.
Okay, so step up to it and sort of monitor the homework situation and then take action if you have to. I suppose this might also be the case where you have to pull in a third party if you really can't intervene. There are a number of people moving a little bit ahead to high school who talk about really oppositional behavior from their either 13-year-old or farther along in high school. Kids who just don't want to hear that they need to get organized or don't want to be involved in organization strategies, and parents who just really feel that it's very tough to get their kids to step up and address some of the problems that they have.
Yeah, I hear what you mean, Susan.
Any thoughts on that?
Those are the toughest kids because as parents we know that they need help, but they're just so resistant. And we get those students all the time. And I think, they fall in 2 different camps. One group of kids, they absolutely will not accept any help. Then, those are the toughest kids. But there really aren't that many of them. Usually they understand that they need help, but they just don't want to hear it from a parent. And so for those students, finding somebody else, you might want to say, hey, I contacted this tutoring company, for example. They have 2 tutors available. I'm wondering if one of these people might work for you, and let them pick. And really with the kids that are oppositional, it's all about the personality match. It's so important. It's pretty much all the battle, because if they like that person, they feel that person's working for them and not their parent, they're going to be much more willing to accept the help, but it takes time. Sometimes, when you have a really oppositional student, it's way beyond an academic issue, and that's when you may want to seek therapy.
Okay. Great comment here from Christine, who says, here's why my daughter finally understood that studying in bed wasn't a great idea. Her Apple iBook got overheated because of dust lint, and an Apple genius convinced her not to study in bed. I love that. I wish we'd had that in our household.
Oh, gosh. That's very lucky.
I know. Really. That's to your point about having someone else be the one to toe the line. What about, this is again, late elementary, early high school, kids who just lose all the assignments? We have one person here who has been bugging the teachers on her child's behalf because her child is afraid to approach them or and the teachers are becoming annoyed. She's going to meet with the teachers tomorrow, and she's wondering, what should she do? Her child just is not able to hang on to the homework assignments. And we know this is common, right, with ADHD kids. Mm-hmm. As one of our speakers spoke about the homework genie who eats homework either on its way home or on its way back to school.
Oh, geez, that homework genie. I hear about it often. I guess it depends if whether the child isn't bringing home the assignments or isn't bringing back the assignments. There's been actually some research about organizational systems for kids with ADHD, and one of the things they found is that having a dedicated homework folder is really helpful. So this is one folder for all assignments. On the left side, you label it to be completed or homework to do, and then on the right side is finished or done or ready to turn in, something like that. So often, kids will actually do the work, but then they go the next day, the teacher calls for it, and they can't find it because sometimes they leave it on the counter, sometimes they've shoved it in their English book, sometimes it's at the bottom of their backpack. They do all different sorts of things with it. So they need a system for maintaining their homework, and dedicated homework folder is a really good idea. But it's also good to know from the teacher, how do you want the homework? Because I find that once kids get to middle and high school, every teacher is a little bit different. And some will say, well, it's the expectation when you walk into this classroom, you put it in the basket. And others will say, well, when I call for it. Or others will say, it's collected by a classmate. And so because expectations might be different in every class, kids often forget what the expectation is. And that's why they forget to turn it in.
Do you advise meeting with the teacher to set up a system for making sure that homework comes home?
Absolutely.
But people here are saying their child leaves things in their locker. They just forget to bring it home.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great idea, especially in elementary school, because the teacher has far more control over the situation. By the time they get to middle school, they're usually dealing with 7 different teachers and 7 classes.
Right.
For middle school, I just actually went with my youngest son to set up his locker, and there's this great hanging shelving system, and it's called Locker Works, and our tutors have been using it for years. It's really fabulous, but it's basically this hanging, instead of having plastic shelves that always break and they fall down, it's basically a hanging shelving unit. It's fabric, and so you can shove your coat in it. There's room for everything because it will move over to the side, but it doesn't hit the bottom of the locker. And often for kids, whether they're in middle or high school, I say you never want to put anything at the bottom of your locker. That's the place when you go back to your locker in between classes. Whatever homework you have, you just put it at the bottom of the locker. So at the end of the day, all you have to do when you're hurrying, you're rushing, you're getting ready for the bus, you just take all that stuff that's at the bottom of your locker and you dump it into your backpack. So often.
What about sort of moving away from paper altogether? There are people, and that certainly is what worked for my daughter in the end, but there's someone here who says she made an agreement with the teacher that the assignments would be emailed and that he could return them by scanning and email them. And someone else who pointed out that, more and more assignments are naturally on the web or on a website. I mean, I think that's a key breakthrough for kids who have a problem with paper. Have you found that to be the case?
Oh, I found it to be phenomenal for kids. Kids that, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, kids that really struggle with organization just tend to do so much better when things are online and when they keep all their files on their laptop. What they often need help with, however, is where to put those documents, because I've worked with some kids, you open up their laptop, it's like they've got 75 documents on their home screen. So they need adult instruction on setting up folders and then subfolders within those folders so they know where to put stuff. And I mentioned in the beginning about a clean sweep every week where you spend 20 minutes, you put that time on your calendar, you turn up their kids' favorite music really loud, and everybody gets motivated to get something organized. This is a time for your high schooler to just go through their electronic papers and put them into the right folders. But it's so powerful having organizational systems online, even like Dropbox or Evernote. They're just fantastic vehicles for kids.
Right. Question here, Anne, how much should parents be involved? Some parents feel like they're the ones teeing up, here's the homework you have to do, here's the schedule. And other people feel like, well, if they do that, how will their child ever make a transition to independence? How do you weigh, sort of balance the need to be involved with your child, help them stay on schedule, stay on track, and yet weaning them into a place where they'll be able to go to college?
You're right, Susan. It is a delicate balancing act, and I would say you want to help as little as possible. You want to make sure your child understands what the assignments are on a daily basis. So for an elementary schooler, you might say, what do you have tonight? Ask them to show you their assignment notebook or pull up Blackboard or their online homework portal, whatever it's called. Have them show you the assignments, watch them get started, and then walk away. It's not our job as parents to make sure every word is spelled correctly or every math question is answered just right. The teacher really does need to know when the child can't do something. So I do see the parent's role as more of like a coach and making sure that they're doing it correctly, getting it done, but not a tutor, not making sure it's just right. As kids get older, they want a parent's help less and less, and that's when it's tougher. So you might have a weekly check-in with your child instead of something every day. And if grades are sent home in a lot of counties, they get electronic grades every 2 weeks. Some counties, they have a real-time grade book for students online. It's always a good idea to sit down with your child every week and go over their grades and just have a sense of where they are. Because there's nothing more frustrating than getting an interim halfway through the quarter and seeing that your child has D's, C's, and F, whatever, and they're doing so poorly. It's very, very hard for your child to dig themselves out of that predicament when they get there.
That's a really good idea. Make a schedule, in other words, intermittently touch it base, but not necessarily every day, at least when a child's older.
Yes.
So, yeah, that's a great idea. A question about learning. A number of people have described, and I really understand this, that it takes their children, this is sort of later in high school and even first year of college, it takes their child a really long time to read through everything, and that retention is a really big issue. So, I think you mentioned some tips for interactive, and maybe you could talk more about that multimodal sort of learning, because in college and later in high school, just the vast amount of reading the kids have to do can be just so time consuming. And ADHD kids, I think, are renowned for taking an extra long time to get their homework done. How do they balance reading it all and then remembering it, which is just a memory issue? The working memory issues are so serious.
Right. I mean, it's tough because they have working memory issues, and sometimes they have processing speed issues. So, they're just slow readers, and, keeping all that in your memory when you're processing new information is really hard. So There has been a lot of research on audiobooks, and whenever possible, kids should have access to them. So if their textbook, there's an audio version of their textbook, I really recommend that they listen to it and then do something with it at the same time. So the studies found that when kids are reading text that's just above their ability level and they follow along with it as they listen, they improve their comprehension and their fluency more than if they just read it alone. So they should listen to their books or to whatever their material is, but it's really not enough for our kids with ADHD just to follow along. They're not going to retain it. So if it's an online book, they can jot notes electronically. There's usually highlighting features. There's usually different features that allow a student to be interactive with the material.
My ADHD daughter took lots of notes on her laptop whenever in class. I think that's the only way that she stayed focused and retained it was just by literally forcing yourself to write it all down in another form of listening, I guess.
Yes, yeah. And especially in college, if you can ask the professor for the PowerPoint ahead of time, and if you have accommodations, usually that's not a problem. And because if you have that PowerPoint or that whatever presentation the professor has, and you can write notes on it as he goes through the slides, you're just going to be able to frame up the material more than if you just take notes by hand or take them on your laptop. You really need to see that slide and to take notes on that slide. That will help you retrieve the information better later on.
Mm-hmm. That makes a huge amount of sense. Can you talk a little bit about writing? There are several parents whose children have problems writing, and they're wondering, should they write things down, have their children talk and write down, or what's some advice for tackling papers and writing late middle school, high school time frame?
Really, when they're that old, I would definitely get a tutor. I would encourage them to get a writing tutor if that's possible. When they're younger, though, it's a little bit easier. Oftentimes, our students can tell us these fabulous, well-developed stories, but you ask them to write it down and forget it. So often I'll say to students, that sounds really good. Wait, tell me that first sentence again, and I'll write it down for them. And then I'll say, oh, wait, and what would you like the second sentence to be? And I'll write that down for them. And I'll say, okay, how about the next sentence? And they'll tell me what it is. I'm like, okay, great. You write that next one down. And just, it can go back and forth. But really, anytime an adult can start it out, that's lowering the barrier to entry. And that's often what kids need to get started. Often kids, their ideas are so disorganized that having a graphic organizer to start the whole process is really beneficial. That can be, it's kind of like when we were growing up, kind of like the bubbles, if you picture that. But there's also software like Inspiration that provides students with graphic organizers. So, for example, if you have a compare and contrast essay, which is honestly pretty tough, and you have to compare vanilla ice cream to chocolate ice cream, it gives you the template so you can write your ideas about vanilla, your ideas about chocolate, how they are comparable, how they're completely different. And then you click a button and it drops it into a Word document. And so from there, kids can often, if they have okay typing skills, they can often develop their ideas. But this is a visual way to help them get started in the first place.
So it's called Inspiration? It sounds wonderful.
Yes, inspiration.com, and they used to have a free 30-day download. I'm pretty sure they still do. There's a one for younger students for K to 5 called Kid Inspiration, and it's basically the same thing. It's just, the graphics are a little bit different, and you're not going to see complicated essay formats like you would with Inspiration.
Wow. So this is, Terry's asking, my teen has a real problem putting words on paper. So this sounds like a good way to help them get started.
Yeah, and what I would say is if you can find a teacher or somebody else, a tutor maybe, who knows the software, when I first started using it, I noticed that a lot of my students didn't really know how to, it's pretty robust, and didn't really know how to use it very well. So they'd always go to the same templates. But the benefit is exploring all the graphic organizers. So have somebody set it up with your child, or sit with your student and make sure you read through the book and understand how robust the program is.
Okay. Yeah, Christine says Inspiration is great, and there are other programs that are free, e.g. MindJet. So yeah, it sounds like these are really good ideas. A different Christine offers this tip. She's having her 5th grader use 3x5 cards to write just one thought on each card, and then sort them in order to get sort of an outline.
I love that idea. That's a great idea.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
What kind of traits should people look for in a tutor? You mentioned that, fit is really important. And tutors can be very expensive. Have you had families that are able to use high school students or college students? We did that successfully with my daughter. We found a college student just to lower the cost. But what's your thought on finding a tutor?
Well, it depends what you need. If you need an expert to, for example, your child has dysgraphia and you need to remediate that problem, or they're dyslexic,
right,
or they have severe executive functioning issues, you really probably don't want to go with the college student because that person doesn't have the expertise. However, if you just plain old want a homework helper, then a college student is a good option. And you're right, it's far less expensive. And for somebody to sit with your child and do the work, personality is really just so tremendously important. And kids, especially little kids, they love, older kids. They love college students. Right. They often look up to them. So, again, it depends what your child's need is. And that's the best way to think about it.
I mean, I think a lot of kids, and people have posted this, really like having someone in the room with them, the sort of body double concept or homework helper. And I guess one of the concerns that people have posted is, their child needs someone in the room with them. What happens when they go to college? And I just point out that the disability offices in many colleges are great. We certainly took advantage of that. And at my daughter's college, they actually provided Kurzweil software to read. They scanned the books so that they could be listened to, which was hugely helpful.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'd say that the key is to make sure your child can use other students too. So when they're in high school, make sure that they're comfortable calling somebody or texting somebody and setting up a Skype session or a FaceTime or meeting with a group in the library. Really to survive, even in high school, you have challenging AP classes or IB or honors. You really need to find a network of people because really that's how you're going to learn best anyways. Hearing the material from different points of view, rehashing it with somebody else so that when you go to college, in college, study groups are very, very normal, more normal than they are in high school. And you really have to be okay with approaching people in your class and setting something up.
That makes sense. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, unfortunately, though, a lot of ADHD kids have social problems. So the whole idea of finding a group of peers with whom you can discuss things is also a challenge. But that makes sense. If you can work it through with other people out loud, that's definitely going to make sense, be helpful for anyone with working memory.
You're right, Susan. I'm also thinking just having the practice of even approaching an adult. And so often I've seen kids go off to college and they are entitled to services and they won't use them. And they haven't really practiced how to go ask in the first place, how to talk to the professor.
Well, that's huge. There are 5 or 6 people here who have said that specifically about their child in college, that they've implored them to go to the disability office and they won't, they won't do it. So, yeah, that's, and even with all the tutoring help that most schools have nowadays, that's a challenge. Just a final question on computers. There are a couple of people on the webinar who are uncomfortable with allowing their child to have a computer in their room. And yet we've talked a lot about software and assignments online. And how do you, at least in my kids' schools, having a computer was key to everything they did. So what's your thinking on computers, laptops? and availability of computers?
It depends on the age of your child and also the responsibility level. If your child has a computer in your room and every time you walk by, all of a sudden the screen is minimized, that's a red flag that something else is going on and it's not going to work. So, if it's more of a distraction than a help, it's not a good idea if you're constantly fighting that battle. I don't think that little kids, middle and
that makes
elementary
sense.
kids do not need it.
But general, I think people...
Right. I don't think that younger students really need a computer in their room. They can have one on the first floor of the house, in the home office,
right,
in the kitchen, wherever. But I do think technology is so important to our students. I'm not saying they shouldn't have access to it. We want to be careful about where they're accessing it. It's a little bit different when your child is in high school, I would say.
Yeah. A tip from Nancy. I want to support this concept because this is also what we did. She said when she brought her daughter to college, they went over to the disability office and lo and behold, there was someone there, and they had an introductory meeting right there before school even started. Had she not done that, it would have taken her daughter a long time to go there and set it up. We did the same thing, Nancy. We actually scheduled a meeting at the disability office during the visiting student weekend, senior year in high school. It was still a challenge to get my daughter to take advantage of the services, but at least she knew the people and knew someone there, and we knew that she knew where it was and they knew her. But yeah, I think it's definitely a challenge to get college kids to take advantage of the services that are available. Okay, any final thoughts? We're almost out of time. This has been so helpful, Anne. We could go on for a long time, but
I know. I just love this topic. It's such a fine line we as parents of ADHD kids face and straddle and struggle with on a daily basis. But I guess I'd just leave with one final thought, and that's that 80% of what kids with ADHD hear in school is negative. 80%. And 20% is positive.
Wow.
So as parents, if we can kind of shift that statistic, and when they come home from school as much as possible, we can be that 80% positive, although I know it's really hard sometimes. But just keeping that in mind that during the day, they may not be getting a lot of pats on the back. But at home, if we can empathize and show that we support them, that's what they're going to really remember.
Okay, great advice. Be positive. Give them support. Thank you again. Thank you, everyone, for joining in today. And thanks, Anne. Thanks again to CogMed, the Working Memory Training Program, for sponsoring this webinar. Thank you, everyone.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.